The young employee stood in the center of the conference room, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. His hands trembled slightly, not just from nerves, but from the anger and humiliation that had been building inside him since the moment he realized his mistake. The room was buzzing with quiet conversations, the low murmur of co-workers shifting in their seats, waiting for the meeting to begin. But all attention quickly turned toward him as his boss, a tall man with broad shoulders and a booming voice, pointed directly at him. The gesture was sharp, almost theatrical, designed to dominate the room, and the young employee's stomach knotted as the mockery began. "Do you realize what you've done?" the boss barked, voice echoing off the walls. "This is a serious mistake. How could someone be so careless?" The room erupted with laughter. Some co-workers leaned forward in their chairs, whispering, sharing snide remarks about the young man's error. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief, clearly entertained by the spectacle. A few had their phones out, recording the moment, no doubt planning to share it later, spreading the humiliation beyond the walls of the office. The young man swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain silent, to not give his boss the satisfaction of an immediate reaction. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the table in front of him, burning with quiet determination. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he knew that words spoken in anger now would accomplish nothing. He had to think, he had to plan, he had to wait. The boss took a step closer, the smell of his cologne overpowering, his eyes narrow and predatory. "Do you think anyone here will take you seriously after this?" he demanded, gesturing toward the group of co-workers who were now fully invested in the spectacle. "Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" The laughter grew, louder this time, echoing through the room. The young employee felt the heat rise to his cheeks, but he refused to show the embarrassment he felt. He bit his lip, forcing himself to stay calm, letting the anger simmer beneath the surface. Every fiber of his being was tense, coiled like a spring, waiting for the right moment to release the energy he was storing. He remembered the countless hours he had spent perfecting his work, staying late at the office when others had left, double-checking every detail, sacrificing weekends, and even late nights at home to make sure that he met every deadline. And yet, none of that mattered to the boss or the co-workers in the room. They only saw one mistake, one moment of imperfection, and they pounced on it like sharks sensing blood in the water. The young man's chest tightened, his heartbeat quickening, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, deliberately. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him crack. He would not react impulsively. He would wait, he would plan, and they would all regret underestimating him. The boss, sensing that his humiliation was effective, leaned back slightly and smirked, eyes scanning the room. "I hope everyone is taking notes," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is how mistakes are handled. This is how you learn the difference between competence and carelessness." A few co-workers nodded, trying to appear serious, while others snickered under their breath. The young employee could feel every gaze on him, every judgment, every snide thought, and he let it all fuel the storm of determination inside him. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "You'll regret this. You won't see it coming, but you'll regret it." The boss continued, his arrogance unchecked, pointing at the young man as if physically pushing him down with authority. "You have embarrassed yourself, embarrassed me, and embarrassed this team," he said, voice rising. "Do you understand the damage you've caused?" The laughter crescendoed, a wave of mockery that washed over him, but he stood still, silent, letting the moment sink in. Every second of this public humiliation was being etched into his memory, a record of the disrespect he had endured, a motivation for the plan that was already beginning to form in his mind. As the boss paused, letting the room absorb the impact, the young employee allowed himself a small, quiet survey of the crowd. Some co-workers were openly amused, leaning back in their chairs, smirking, whispering, recording. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure how to react, sensing the tension, but unwilling to speak up. And then he noticed her, the colleague who had always seemed confident, who had smiled knowingly during previous meetings, who had subtly encouraged the mockery yesterday. She was watching closely, eyes wide, clearly enjoying the spectacle, confident that he had no power, no influence, no comeback. The young man's resolve hardened. He would not just respond. He would overturn every assumption they had about him, and she would be the first to realize it. The boss took another step closer, leaning over the table, voice dripping with contempt. Do you even understand the gravity of this mistake? Everyone in this room is relying on competence, and yet here you are, failing publicly. The words hit him, but instead of breaking, he absorbed them, letting each insult and every mocking glance add fuel to the fire of his determination. He would not explode in anger. He would not cry. He would not retreat. He would wait. He would plan. And when the moment came, they would all see the truth, his intelligence, his patience, his hidden power, and the lesson they would never forget. The whispers of co-workers continued to swirl around him, some questioning, some snickering, some leaning toward the boss for approval, all fully engaged in the scene. The young man's mind raced, silently constructing a mental map of his plan, a strategy that would turn this humiliation into ultimate victory. He imagined each step, each move, each calculated action that would bring the office to awe and the boss to silent recognition. Every insult, every sneer, every chuckle now became a building block for his plan. The boss finally straightened up, eyes glinting with satisfaction, apparently pleased with the power he had demonstrated. I hope this is a lesson you will never forget, he said, his voice triumphant. Laughter and whispers filled the room as the young employee stood silently, chest tight, fists clenched, and mind working. The audience watching this unfold can feel the suspense. What will he do next? How will he respond? What kind of plan is forming behind the calm exterior, and when will it unfold? He stayed in the room for a few more moments, letting the boss enjoy his victory, letting the co-workers think they had won. He took slow, deliberate breaths, each one reinforcing his calm, each one fortifying his resolve. And then, as the meeting moved toward its next agenda item, he whispered under his breath, a vow to himself, "You'll see. You'll all see. This is not over." Every eye in the room remained unaware of the silent storm brewing inside him, a storm that would soon turn the tides of power in a way they could never imagine. The young employee exited the conference room later that day, moving with purpose, not arrogance, not desperation, but a quiet confidence. He walked past co-workers who had laughed at him, past the boss who had displayed his arrogance in front of everyone, all the while feeling the satisfaction of having a plan forming in the shadows. The audience feels the suspense heighten. What will happen next? How will the humiliation be turned into triumph? Every step he took was deliberate, every movement precise, building the anticipation, stretching the tension, ensuring that the next moment of revelation would be unforgettable. By the time he reached his desk, he had already begun mapping out every detail of the revenge that would not be impulsive, not violent, but strategic, clever, and utterly undeniable. Every mocking word spoken that morning, every laugh that had echoed in the conference room, was now stored in his memory, fueling his focus. He opened his laptop, made notes, and began working on the plan that would ensure the ultimate reversal of roles, the exposure of hidden power, and the lesson that arrogance and public humiliation could be met with intelligence, patience, and quiet dominance. The office continued its routine around him, oblivious to the silent storm he was crafting. The young employee, calm and composed, leaned back for a moment, eyes narrowing with thought, mind racing with calculations, and every detail meticulously prepared. The suspense had now fully built in the minds of the audience. The humiliation was only the beginning, the public mockery was only the trigger, and the plan forming in silence promised a resolution so dramatic, so unexpected, that it would leave every co-worker, every observer, and his boss completely stunned. Every whispered prediction, every glance of curiosity, every gasp of anticipation in the audience's imagination was now tied to the young man's next move, and the story had only just begun to unfold. After leaving the conference room, the young employee walked to his car slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the weight of humiliation pressing on his shoulders, yet transforming into a silent determination. The streets were quiet, early morning light reflecting off the pavement, and he allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, centering his thoughts. The laughter, the mocking tones of his boss, the whispers of co-workers, all of it fueled an idea that had begun forming in his mind during the meeting. He clenched his fists, not in anger, but in preparation. He promised himself silently that he would not react with impulse or confrontation. He would plan, strategize, and make sure that when the moment came, it would be unforgettable. He returned to his small apartment, shutting the door behind him with a sense of focus. The room was modest but tidy, a reflection of his disciplined nature. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop, and let his mind review every detail of the morning. The humiliation had been public, deliberate, designed to wound, but he would not let it define him. Instead, he would use it as fuel, constructing a meticulous plan that would turn the power dynamics upside down. He started by reviewing documents, emails, and company policies, analyzing areas where he could subtly gain leverage without anyone noticing. Every click, every scroll, every note he made was purposeful, each forming a piece of a puzzle that would lead to the ultimate reversal. He thought carefully about timing, the people involved, the moments when his influence could be most felt. He considered how his boss's arrogance had blinded him to reality, how the co-workers who laughed were unwitting allies in his plan. The young man made a mental map of the office, recalling the seating arrangement, who watched closely, who whispered, and who recorded the moment on their phones. Every detail mattered. He jotted down observations, which decisions his boss had authority over, which approvals required signatures, which projects were currently in limbo, and how he could subtly steer outcomes without revealing his hand. The suspense built as he visualized the layers of the plan, every step calculated, every movement orchestrated. He remembered that he held a significant ownership stake in the company, a fact that was unknown to his boss and co-workers. This secret, carefully guarded, gave him power that could be revealed at exactly the right moment. He imagined how the revelation would shock everyone, how the arrogance of his boss would crumble instantly, and how the whispers of co-workers would change from mockery to astonishment. He pictured the expressions of disbelief, the widening of eyes, the sudden realization that the young employee they had underestimated for years was in fact holding the strings behind the scenes. The suspense was intoxicating, building like a wave about to crash over the office. The young man then focused on small, actionable steps. First, he would begin earning subtle trust from his colleagues, reinforcing his competence without drawing attention. He would suggest minor improvements, quietly influence decisions, and create a reputation of reliability. He would document his progress, track approvals, and maintain a calm demeanor, giving no hint of the storm he was preparing. Each small victory would set the stage for the larger reveal, creating tension and anticipation that would make the final moment unforgettable. He could already feel the audience on edge, imagining each step, each quiet victory, each piece of suspense building toward the climax. Next, he considered his boss directly. He knew that arrogance often blinds people to reality, and the more overconfident the boss felt, the more spectacular the reveal would be. He planned moments of subtle disruption, gently steering decisions, pointing out overlooked errors, and quietly implementing improvements that would embarrass the boss without overtly confronting him. Each move was like a chess piece sliding into position, positioning the young employee for the ultimate checkmate. The suspense grew. How would the boss react when he discovered that the young man had been quietly gaining influence behind the scenes, every step of the way? He also mapped out how to maximize the impact of the final reveal. He imagined a company-wide meeting, where the boss would stand before everyone, still unaware of the hidden ownership and influence. He would calmly present documents, approvals, and his ownership stake, dismantling the boss's authority with precision. The co-workers who had laughed and mocked would witness the power shift firsthand, their surprise and awe adding layers to the moment. He pictured the expressions in detail, the shock, the embarrassment, the sudden respect forming in real time. The suspense of this visualized scene tightened in his chest, making the plan feel tangible, almost within reach. The young man paused briefly, reflecting on the psychological component. He understood that humiliation, revenge, and respect were all tied to perception. By maintaining calm, control, and patience, he could create maximum impact. He realized that shouting, confrontation, or aggression would diminish the elegance of the plan. Instead, every subtle action, every carefully placed influence, and every strategic move would amplify the suspense, ensuring that when the reveal came, it would be complete, undeniable, and unforgettable. The audience would be on the edge of their seats, every second leading to the final, dramatic moment of triumph. He began organizing his notes, outlining the sequence of events, the minor victories that would accumulate into a major shift of power. He planned interactions with colleagues, timing suggestions, approvals, and guidance to create the illusion of normalcy while secretly orchestrating the outcome. Every email, every document, every conversation was a step in the larger design. The suspense stretched as he envisioned each reaction, each surprised glance, each whisper of disbelief that would accompany the final reveal. The audience, like silent spectators, could imagine their own anticipation rising with each step of the plan. Finally, as the night deepened, he reviewed the strategy one last time. He imagined the morning of the reveal, the careful presentation, the stunned silence, and the transformation of authority in the room. He visualized the boss's face, a mixture of shock and disbelief, as the young employee calmly displayed the truth of his ownership and influence. He could feel the tension, the suspense, the anticipation, as if the energy of the room was already charged for the moment that had not yet arrived. He smiled slightly, satisfaction and confidence radiating from him. The plan was meticulous, the suspense complete, and the audience, imagined or real, would feel the thrill of the impending reversal. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet satisfaction settle over him. The humiliation of the morning was now transformed into fuel, a catalyst for strategy, patience, and ultimate triumph. The suspense had been carefully crafted, each detail adding to the tension, each small step bringing him closer to the dramatic payoff. He closed his laptop, ready to rest, but sleep was elusive. His mind replayed each scene, rehearsed each movement, and visualized each reaction, preparing him for the moment when humiliation would turn into awe, mockery into respect, and public embarrassment into the ultimate demonstration of quiet power. As he finally rested, his mind still active, the promise of the coming day lingered in his thoughts. Every insult, every laugh, every snicker from co-workers and his boss fueled the strategy, sharpened his patience, and strengthened his resolve. The suspense hung in the air, thick and tangible, the audience fully engaged even in anticipation, imagining the dramatic reversal that would leave everyone stunned. The young employee knew that his plan would not just correct the humiliation of the past but elevate him to a position of undeniable authority, and the suspense of the unfolding events would grip everyone present, holding them in awe of the quiet, calculated, and brilliant execution of his strategy. The following days in the office were deceptively ordinary, but for the young employee, every moment was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. He arrived on time, dressed sharply but unobtrusively, blending into the routine while observing everything around him. He noticed the way his boss strutted through the halls, still basking in the glory of the public humiliation he had delivered, unaware that the tides were slowly turning. Each smile, each greeting, each casual nod to co-workers was a thread he could manipulate, weaving influence subtly into the fabric of office dynamics. The suspense grew with every interaction, as the audience could imagine the slow, precise accumulation of quiet power. He started by offering small suggestions during meetings, always framed as helpful ideas, never confrontational. He pointed out minor inefficiencies, suggested improvements in workflows, and gently highlighted overlooked details. Each action seemed innocent on the surface, but behind it, he was building a foundation of credibility. Co-workers began noticing his reliability, whispering approving comments to each other, completely unaware of the larger plan forming. The boss, confident in his authority, paid little attention, dismissing the subtle interventions as normal contributions. The suspense increased. Would anyone realize the strategic significance of these small victories? The young employee also leveraged his knowledge of company policies and procedures, quietly steering decisions in ways that reinforced his influence. He prepared reports, made suggestions on project timelines, and provided insight that proved invaluable to minor crises. Each success, no matter how small, added to his credibility. The boss remained unaware, still focused on projecting dominance, unaware that the young employee's quiet competence was gradually shifting perception in the office. The audience feels the tension growing. Every small victory is a step toward the ultimate reveal. Every unnoticed move a seed of suspense. Even informal interactions became part of the strategy. In the break room, he offered thoughtful advice, quietly helping colleagues solve problems, subtly demonstrating his knowledge and capability. Every gesture was calculated, every word deliberate. The co-workers who had laughed at him before began to notice his reliability and insight. The boss, blinded by arrogance, assumed the young employee's contributions were minor or incidental, never suspecting the strategic web that was being woven. The suspense hung in the air like an invisible thread, connecting each subtle move to the looming climax. He also started paying attention to timing and optics. He made sure that key approvals and successful suggestions were noticed by the right people at the right time, subtly undermining the boss's narrative of dominance. A report he prepared would be quietly praised in front of a manager. A solution to a minor problem would be attributed to his initiative, all building credibility and influence. Each moment, each observation, was stored in his mind, forming a mental map of leverage points he could exploit later. The suspense was almost tangible, as if every whisper, every glance, every nod in the office added weight to the anticipation of the final reveal. The young employee also cultivated allies quietly, offering support, advice, and guidance to those who were observant enough to notice. These small connections strengthened his network, creating subtle loyalty that would amplify the impact of his ultimate reveal. The audience senses the tension in these quiet interactions. Every small victory builds anticipation, every unnoticed effort is a piece of the puzzle, and every subtle nod or acknowledgement is a thread in the larger tapestry of his strategy. He tracked every success meticulously, mentally noting which co-workers had begun to recognize his reliability, which were still skeptical, and which were actively influenced by his subtle guidance. He timed suggestions and interventions for maximum impact, ensuring that when the ultimate reveal came, the shift in perception would be undeniable. The suspense grew, layer upon layer, each small victory adding weight to the audience's anticipation. They could feel the tension, the excitement, imagining how the culmination of these efforts would shock the office and his boss alike. Meanwhile, the boss continued his routine, overconfident and oblivious. He remained focused on enforcing authority, unaware that the young employee's subtle moves had already begun to erode the narrative of dominance he had constructed. The audience watches, heart racing, knowing that every unnoticed success is a step closer to the dramatic confrontation that will upend the power dynamics. The young employee smiled quietly to himself at the thought, savoring the suspense, knowing that patience and strategy were far more powerful than impulsive confrontation. Day by day, small victories accumulated. A proposal he submitted was accepted with praise. A project he guided moved smoothly under his direction, and his insight quietly became indispensable to daily operations. The boss remained blind to the growing influence, still relishing the humiliation he had inflicted, while the young employee built momentum unseen. The suspense deepened, each unnoticed win, each subtle manipulation, each quiet demonstration of competence raised the stakes, preparing the audience for the final, unforgettable reversal. Finally, he reflected on the strategy he had employed, seeing the web of influence complete. Every small victory, every whispered acknowledgement, every unnoticed contribution had served its purpose. The suspense reached its peak, as the audience could sense the approaching moment when patience, strategy, and subtle power would collide in a dramatic reveal. The young employee leaned back at his desk, confident, calm, and ready. The stage was set for confrontation, the tension thick, and the anticipation electric. The office carried on around him, unaware of the storm gathering quietly. His co-workers had begun to respect him subtly, and his boss remained arrogant and blind to the shifts occurring in perception. The suspense continued, gripping the audience, as they understood that the culmination of these small victories would soon be revealed in a spectacular and satisfying reversal of fortune. Every small action, every unnoticed effort, every quiet intervention had built toward the moment that would leave the boss stunned, the co-workers amazed, and the young employee triumphant beyond expectation. The day of the confrontation arrived, and the office hummed with ordinary activity, unaware of the storm quietly approaching. The young employee entered the building with calm confidence, walking past co-workers who exchanged glances, sensing the tension but not yet understanding its source. His boss, striding through the hallway as usual, exuded arrogance, unaware that the young man he had humiliated and dismissed now held subtle power over the office dynamics. Every step the employee took was deliberate, measured, a silent preparation for the moment that would leave everyone stunned. The suspense hung thick in the air, palpable and electric, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. The meeting room filled quickly, co-workers shuffling papers, settling into chairs, and casting curious glances at the young man who now walked with quiet authority. The boss leaned back at the head of the table, a smug smile curling on his lips, ready to assert dominance as he always did. But today, the young employee was prepared. He had organized documents, gathered approvals, and cultivated the subtle loyalty of co-workers who would amplify his influence the moment the reveal began. Every minor victory over the past days had been a building block, unseen by the boss, yet forming a foundation strong enough to upend the arrogance he projected so confidently. As the boss began his usual lecture, criticizing minor delays and mistakes, the young employee listened carefully, eyes steady, absorbing every word, every gesture. He noted the arrogance, the overconfidence, the habitual interruptions. Then, when the boss paused, expecting agreement and silent compliance, the young man spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and deliberate. "I believe there's an important detail regarding this project that has not been considered," he said softly, yet every word carried weight. The boss turned sharply, a hint of irritation in his eyes, not expecting any challenge. The suspense in the room thickened instantly, co-workers leaning forward, sensing tension, curiosity sparking as the power dynamics subtly shifted. He presented his evidence slowly, carefully, each document and approval meticulously displayed. He spoke of policy compliance, approvals, and procedural authority, highlighting the ways in which decisions required his input for validation. Each point was precise, leaving no room for debate, yet presented without aggression or arrogance. The boss's confident smile faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he realized the young man's careful orchestration. The audience could feel the suspense intensify. How would the boss react when his authority was subtly dismantled? When the power he assumed was absolute was suddenly revealed to be conditional? Co-workers exchanged astonished glances, whispering softly, noticing the subtle influence of the young employee. He continued to outline approvals, decisions, and contributions, demonstrating a command over critical aspects of the company's operations that had gone unnoticed by the boss. Every gesture, every document, every calm, deliberate word contributed to a crescendo of suspense. The boss, still unaware of the full picture, attempted to interject, but the young man maintained eye contact, calmly, refusing to be interrupted, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of his revelations. The suspense reached a near-breaking point as he paused deliberately, letting the weight of his subtle power hang in the air. He allowed co-workers and the boss alike to absorb the implications of his quiet influence over decisions they had assumed were under full control of the arrogant manager. Every flicker of surprise in their expressions, every hesitant glance, every subtle whisper intensified the tension, making the audience lean forward in anticipation of the final, dramatic reveal. Then, without a hint of aggression, he began to reveal the secret that had been carefully hidden: his ownership stake in the company. He displayed the documents, the numbers, the percentages that confirmed he had a controlling interest, a fact no one had suspected, not the boss, not the co-workers. The boss froze, eyes widening, mouth opening slightly in shock, unable to process the reality. The young man's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the sudden disruption of perceived authority, amplifying the suspense to its peak. Every eye in the room focused on the young employee, some with astonishment, others with awe, and the boss, suddenly humbled, struggled to find words. The young man allowed the suspense to linger, refusing to gloat, speaking in measured, quiet tones. "I own a significant portion of this company," he said simply. "Major decisions cannot proceed without my approval. Every action, every plan, every direction this office takes requires consideration of the responsibilities I hold." The weight of these words sank heavily into the room. The co-workers gasped quietly, some leaning forward to better absorb the revelation, while the boss slumped slightly, the arrogance he carried with such confidence melting away in disbelief. He continued calmly, reinforcing the lesson. Respect must be earned, not demanded. Authority assumed through intimidation is meaningless if not supported by understanding, patience, and awareness. Each sentence was precise, each pause deliberate, letting the suspense stretch, letting the audience feel the tension, and ensuring that the boss fully comprehended the reversal of power. The suspense was electrifying, the anticipation gripping. How would the arrogant manager recover? How would the office process this dramatic shift? Co-workers whispered among themselves, some still stunned, others nodding subtly, acknowledging the quiet brilliance of the young man's strategy. The boss finally spoke, voice barely audible, faltering, I didn't. I had no idea. The young employee remained calm, allowing the weight of truth to resonate, letting the silence speak volumes. The suspense persisted, the tension palpable, as the room absorbed the shift in power. Witnessing humiliation turned into a subtle but absolute dominance. Every minor victory, every strategic move of the past days, every careful observation and quiet manipulation had culminated in this moment. The suspense of the build-up paid off magnificently, as the boss realized that his public mockery, his arrogance, and his assumed control had all been undercut by quiet intelligence, preparation, and patience. The young employee's calm presence amplified the impact, making the confrontation unforgettable, the lesson clear, and the suspense satisfyingly resolved while leaving anticipation for the closure. Finally, he stepped back slightly, allowing the room to settle, allowing the boss and co-workers alike to fully process the revelation. The suspense slowly transitioned into awe and recognition, leaving the audience satisfied yet eager for the next part. The final moments of triumph, the complete closure, and the ultimate demonstration of quiet, strategic power that would cement his victory over humiliation and arrogance. The stage was set for the final acts, the story poised for an unforgettable resolution that would leave everyone, including the boss, completely stunned and the audience completely engaged. The young employee stood calmly in the middle of the conference room, the weight of every eye in the office on him, his presence commanding attention without arrogance, without a word more than necessary. The boss, still frozen in disbelief from the earlier confrontation, shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain control, to salvage some semblance of authority, but the quiet power emanating from the young man left him visibly shaken. The co-workers, who had been whispering nervously, leaned in closer, their curiosity piquing as the suspense stretched in the room like a thick, tangible fog. The young man allowed a small pause, letting every second intensify the moment, every heartbeat echoing with tension, every breath of silence drawing the audience deeper into anticipation. Finally, he began the final reveal, the moment that would ensure the humiliation of the boss and the awe of everyone else. His voice was calm, deliberate, and steady, carrying authority without aggression. There is something important that has gone unnoticed. Something that has been quietly overlooked, yet it defines who truly holds power in this company. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on the boss, then moving across co-workers who had once laughed, their expressions now unreadable. The suspense in the air tightened, each person holding their breath, feeling the tension build with every measured second. He reached for a folder on the table, pulling out documents that had been meticulously prepared over days of quiet strategy. The boss's eyes flicked nervously toward the papers, his posture stiffening as he tried to comprehend what was about to unfold. The young man placed the folder carefully on the table, opening it to reveal charts, ownership records, and official documents proving his significant stake in the company. The room went silent, the only sound the subtle rustle of papers and the shallow breaths of those present. The suspense was electric, palpable, almost suffocating, as the audience could imagine every eye widening, every jaw dropping, every heartbeat quickening in anticipation of the boss's realization. "I own a substantial portion of this company," he said calmly, letting each word resonate in the room. "Decisions cannot move forward without my approval. Every project, every budget, every major action requires my consent." The boss froze completely, his face paling, his confidence shattered, unable to form a coherent thought. He opened his mouth, intending to speak, but the words caught in his throat, swallowed by the gravity of the revelation. The audience feels the suspense reach a peak. How will the boss react to the undeniable truth? How will the co-workers, who had once mocked, respond to the sudden reversal of power? The young employee continued, maintaining perfect composure. Authority is not defined by volume, threats, or public humiliation, he said, his tone even, almost gentle. It is defined by responsibility, knowledge, and the trust that comes from actions, not from arrogance. His words, simple but weighty, resonated through the room. The boss's shoulders slumped, his previous dominance evaporating under the realization of his own misjudgment. The co-workers exchanged looks, some still wide-eyed with shock, some whispering quietly to each other, all now aware of the silent influence the young man had wielded for days, unnoticed until this defining moment. The suspense continued to mount as he went over the documents in detail, calmly highlighting key approvals, ownership percentages, and decision-making authority that had gone unacknowledged by everyone, especially the boss. Every word he spoke, every piece of evidence he presented, stripped away layers of assumed control, demonstrating a power that had been present all along but unseen. The co-workers' whispers grew, some gasps slipped, eyes widened, and the room vibrated with the tension of realization. The audience could feel it, the combination of shock, awe, and the thrill of witnessing a carefully orchestrated reveal reaching its zenith. The boss attempted to speak again, a stammered protest escaping, I didn't. I had no idea. But the young man's calm gaze and unflinching demeanor left no room for interruption. Every attempt at reclaiming authority was rendered ineffective. Every gesture of dominance dissolved in the face of undeniable fact. The suspense gripped the room, the tension stretching like a taut string, every silent second amplifying the impact of the revelation. The audience is on the edge, sensing the power shift, feeling the weight of every subtle victory that had been accumulating for days, culminating in this breathtaking moment. The young employee leaned slightly forward, emphasizing the finality of the revelation. This is why patience, strategy, and quiet competence are stronger than arrogance, threats, or public humiliation. What was mocked yesterday has grown into respect, influence, and undeniable authority today. The words resonated, a measured, deliberate lesson, leaving the boss stunned and co-workers silent, processing the complete reversal of power. The suspense remained thick, the tension almost unbearable, as the audience imagined the mixture of awe and shock, understanding fully the clever orchestration that had led to this unforgettable climax. He allowed a pause, letting the room absorb every detail, every implication. Eyes darted between the documents and the young employee, the boss shrinking under the weight of the undeniable truth. The whispers ceased, replaced by stunned silence, and the suspense lingered like a living presence. Every small victory, every carefully plotted step over the past days, had led to this moment. The audience could feel the intensity, imagining the slow dawning realization of power, the respect that would now be impossible to ignore, the quiet mastery transforming humiliation into triumph. Finally, with perfect composure, he closed the folder, standing tall, eyes calm, a subtle smile forming. The boss, humbled and shaken, lowered his gaze, his arrogance replaced by recognition of the young employee's brilliance. Co-workers, who had once whispered and laughed, now exchanged astonished glances, some nodding subtly, others still unable to speak. The suspense had transitioned into a satisfying anticipation of closure, the audience fully aware that the next moments would finalize the transformation and deliver ultimate triumph. Every element of humiliation, every act of quiet strategy, every carefully orchestrated move culminated in this stunning revelation. The young employee's final words, calm and deliberate, resonated through the room. Authority is meaningful only when earned, respect is deserved only when demonstrated, and underestimating someone because of a single mistake is a mistake itself. The suspense finally began to resolve, leaving a room filled with awe, a boss humbled, co-workers impressed, and an audience captivated. The tension had been maintained perfectly, every moment building toward the climax, and now the stage was set for the final closure, the ultimate reward for patience, intelligence, and quiet mastery. The young employee straightened his shoulders, a calm confidence radiating from every movement as the room slowly absorbed the revelation. The boss, still pale and stunned, slumped into his chair, speechless, the arrogance that had defined him for years now evaporating into a mixture of shock and reluctant respect. Co-workers, who had once whispered, laughed, and recorded his humiliation, now stared in awe, whispering among themselves, sharing glances that conveyed astonishment, disbelief, and admiration. Every small victory, every carefully calculated step of the past days had led to this moment, and the suspense hung thick in the air, intensifying as everyone realized the full magnitude of the transformation. The young man moved through the room deliberately, each step measured, his calm presence commanding attention without a word more than necessary. He glanced at co-workers who had laughed at him before, their expressions now softened with surprise, their disbelief giving way to recognition of his competence and subtle mastery. The boss tried to regain some authority, to interject, but the weight of undeniable evidence, careful strategy, and quiet confidence rendered his attempts powerless. The suspense was electric, palpable, almost as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the next move, the final act of closure. He approached his desk, calm and composed, placing the folder with the ownership and approval documents in the center, letting the papers speak for themselves. The boss leaned forward slightly, eyes wide, trying to comprehend fully the consequences of what had just been revealed. The young employee's gaze swept across the room, taking in every stunned expression, every whispered word, every subtle gasp of astonishment. The suspense lingered, a tangible tension, as the audience could feel the gravity of the power shift, the transformation from humiliation to ultimate triumph, and the quiet lesson of patience and strategy. Then, with deliberate composure, he spoke once more, his voice calm but firm, echoing through the room and silencing every whisper. Authority is not in words alone, nor in threats, nor in public displays of dominance. True authority comes from knowledge, preparation, and the respect earned through consistent action. His eyes held the boss's gaze, steady and unwavering, and the silence that followed magnified the power of his words. The audience could almost feel the weight of every syllable, the impact of every phrase, and the dramatic shift in power that was now complete. Co-workers began to nod subtly, whispering acknowledgments to one another, their previous mockery replaced by admiration and respect. The boss, humbled and pale, leaned back, realizing fully that his previous attempts at dominance had been undone not by confrontation, but by patience, strategy, and intelligence. The suspense remained, but now it was a quiet anticipation, the tension transitioning into satisfaction, as the audience experienced the payoff of the carefully built narrative. The climax of humiliation turned into triumph. The young employee then took a deliberate step back, allowing the room to settle fully, letting the finality of the moment sink in. The boss lowered his gaze, muttering inaudibly, unable to reclaim authority, while co-workers exchanged looks of awe, some still processing the quiet brilliance of the plan. The suspense resolved gradually, leaving a room charged with recognition of cleverness and strategy, a lesson that arrogance and mockery had limits, and patience and quiet competence could shift power completely. The audience, captivated, could feel the full emotional and psychological impact of the reversal, experiencing the triumph alongside the protagonist. He then addressed the room one last time, softly but clearly. This isn't about humiliation. This is about understanding, preparation, and knowing that every action has consequences. Underestimating anyone, even for a single mistake, can lead to unexpected outcomes. The words resonated, reinforcing the lesson, settling the suspense fully while leaving the audience with a sense of closure. The boss remained silent, humbled, and thoughtful, while co-workers reflected on the magnitude of the transformation, the story of clever planning, and the ultimate reversal of power. Finally, the young man leaned back in his chair, calm and composed, a subtle smile curling his lips. The room had shifted entirely in its perception. From mockery to admiration, from arrogance to humility, from disbelief to awe. Every calculated step, every subtle action, every quiet victory had come together to create an unforgettable lesson. The suspense was fully resolved, the tension released, and the audience left with the satisfaction of seeing humiliation transformed into triumph, arrogance humbled, and intelligence rewarded. As he packed up for the day, co-workers approached him quietly, offering small congratulations, subtle nods of respect, some even shaking their heads in disbelief at the cleverness and patience he had demonstrated. The boss remained seated, silent, processing the lesson in humility, fully aware now that power is never absolute and respect must be earned. The young employee's victory was complete, not loud, not vindictive, but perfectly executed, strategic, and unforgettable. The audience, fully engaged, felt the satisfaction of closure, the thrill of the reversal, and the quiet brilliance of intelligence and patience over arrogance and mockery. The office slowly returned to normal activity, but the impact of the revelation lingered. Whispers continued, eyes occasionally glanced toward the young man, and the boss, once so commanding, now moved with a humbler presence. The suspense had evolved into admiration, the tension had transformed into resolution, and the story had reached its satisfying conclusion. The young man, calm and composed, understood that the lesson had been delivered flawlessly, leaving everyone, including the audience, with a sense of closure, triumph, and respect that could not be forgotten. Finally, as the day ended and he left the building, the young employee walked with quiet confidence, fully aware that he had transformed humiliation into respect, public mockery into awe, and the arrogance of his boss into a humbled understanding of reality. The audience, having followed every suspenseful, meticulously crafted step, could feel the satisfaction of the complete journey, from embarrassment to patient strategy, from subtle victories to the final reveal, from tension to ultimate closure, leaving them completely engaged and inspired by the clever, patient, and calculated triumph of the protagonist.